Bloomfield. He said he'd heard my first record, and he said he wanted to show me how the blues were played.
I think that any songwriter, and I think that Bob Dylan knows this more than all of us.
You know, I have a new reaction now when people say, what about Bob Dylan? It is such an honor to have been a part of his life.
What kind of comment could fracture a bond between two musical legends? How does an offhand insult boil into decades of silence? At 83, Bob Dylan uncovers the true stories behind 7 bitter rivalries, revealing the betrayals and grudges he's carried for decades. These aren't petty quarrels. They cut deep, and they shape the musician's life and art in ways we're only learning now. Stay tuned to uncover the painful personal moments that even Dylan couldn't forgive. Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So, did you click the subscribe button? Great, thank you so much. Now, back to the video. Number 1, Eric Clapton. What could make Bob Dylan cancel a major recording session with Eric Clapton, a man widely considered one of the greatest guitarists of all time? In the late 1970s, Clapton made an offhand remark that would light a fuse beneath their already delicate relationship. He suggested Dylan was losing his edge, a comment that reportedly didn't sit well with the enigmatic songwriter. This wasn't just an insult. It came during a period when Dylan was redefining his sound, leaving him especially sensitive to outside opinion. What fueled the tension even further was Clapton's casual observation that many saw him as the new heir to poetic rock, a title Dylan himself had defined. Whether or not Clapton meant harm, it struck a nerve. Dylan was fiercely protective of the artistic territory he carved out, and any suggestion that it could be passed on, even unintentionally, felt personal. The fallout. A planned collaboration between the two was abandoned, and the tension lingered. It's moments like these that reveal Dylan's unexpected vulnerability, even as a towering figure in music. But what happens when the criticism comes from someone far closer to home? Number 2, Joan Baez.
You know, I have a new reaction now when people say, what about Bob Dylan? It is such an honor to have been a part of his life, folk circles. And so I went and I thought, Jesus, no, I never heard anything like it. Never heard any words like it. It's too great to have any resentment about her, anything except a wholehearted feeling of caring and great.
How did a shared passion for folk music and activism turn into a fractured relationship that neither could fully repair? In the early 1960s, Bob Dylan and Joan Baez stood as the golden duo of folk music. They weren't just collaborators, they were partners, both in music and in their collective push for civil rights. Their duets, like their iconic performances at rallies, became powerful symbols of change, with Baez lending her crystalline voice to support Dylan's poetic ingenuity. Together, they represented an idealistic vision of unity in both art and activism. But by 1965, cracks began to show. When Dylan took the stage at the Newport Folk Festival with an electric guitar in hand, it wasn't just the audience who felt betrayed. Joan Baez did too. To her, his embrace of rock and abandonment of protest anthems symbolized a retreat from their shared causes. Baez saw this shift as a loss of purpose, calling it a selfish move. Dylan, on the other hand, viewed her criticism as deeply wounding, especially from someone who had once stood by him so closely. Silence grew, and they wouldn't recover. Did others draw similar blood? Number 3, Lou Reed. What does it take for Bob Dylan to erase someone from his universe with a single word? In 1974, Lou Reed, known for his sharp tongue and avant-garde artistry, dismissed Dylan in an infamous interview. Reed called Dylan's lyrics all smoke and mirrors, branding him a poet of pretense who, in his view, never really meant anything. For someone often hailed as the golden standard of lyrical genius, being reduced so bluntly to artifice was more than just a critique. It was a direct challenge to Dylan's identity as a songwriter. Dylan, however, chose silence. He ignored Reed publicly and privately, a strategy that spoke volumes. Reed's name vanished from spaces where Dylan regularly acknowledged his peers. Years later, in the early 1990s, a Rolling Stone journalist brought up Reed's name during an interview. Dylan, without even blinking, simply asked, "Who?" That one word, delivered with casual dismissiveness, held the weight of years of disdain. It wasn't just a dismissal of Reed's criticism, it was an erasure, a way of making one thing clear: Lou Reed was irrelevant in Dylan's world. So how did Dylan handle an insult even sharper and far less subtle from the infamously cutting Frank Zappa? Number 4, Frank Zappa. What happens when Bob Dylan and Frank Zappa meet at a party? Spoiler, it doesn't end well. Frank Zappa, infamous for his combative humor, had already spent years ridiculing Dylan. He mocked Dylan's distinct voice, labeling it a tragic accident, dismissed his lyrics as pseudo-intellectual ramblings, and even targeted his fans, calling them brainwashed sheep. Most artists shrugged off Zappa's provocations, but for Dylan, the mockery felt personal. Everything culminated at a party in Laurel Canyon. Dylan and Zappa were introduced by a mutual friend, someone hopeful that the two icons might find common ground. Instead, Zappa, true to form, broke the ice with one stinging remark: "I hear silence is your best verse." The jab hit its mark, combining a dig at Dylan's artistry with a swipe at his public persona. Dylan didn't respond, he simply turned and walked out, leaving the party shortly after. This encounter highlighted Dylan's preference for keeping his dignity intact. For him, silence wasn't just a theme in his music, it was his response to blatant disrespect. So, what happens when criticism comes from someone he admired, like Leonard Cohen? Number 5, Leonard Cohen.
Which to me is like pinning a medal on Mount Everest for being the highest mountain. I won't comment on what he said, but I will comment on his receiving the Nobel Prize. Over the years, if you're lucky, your own intentions have very little to do with this.
How does admiration for someone's genius turn into resentment over a single comment? For Bob Dylan and Leonard Cohen, their relationship was a complicated mix of mutual respect and quiet rivalry. Dylan once referred to Cohen as being at the highest level of songwriting, which, coming from the notoriously frugal Dylan when it came to praise, carried immense weight. Yet their bond was never simple. Cohen's rise to fame in the late 1960s came at a moment when Dylan had stepped away from the public eye. As Dylan nursed his injuries following his motorcycle accident, Cohen's poetic, enigmatic presence began to capture hearts and headlines. A shift that may have amplified a shared but unspoken competition. But the real strain began with an innocently worded comment from Cohen during the early 1970s. In an interview, Cohen referred to some of Dylan's earlier songwriting as juvenile compared to the work of more mature poets. The line wasn't meant to wound, but it landed badly for Dylan. He never addressed it outright, but the remark lingered, coloring their interactions for decades. When Cohen passed, Dylan's brief, detached tribute left unresolved tensions hanging in the air. So what happens when someone downplays Dylan's most celebrated collaboration? Number 6, Michael Bloomfield.
Bloomfield said he'd heard my first record, and he said he wanted to show me how the blues were played. Time to bring in a guitar player on my record. I couldn't think of anybody but him. I mean, he just was the best guitar player I ever heard. And I didn't feel much competitive. I didn't feel much competitive with him. I mean, he could outplay anybody, even at that.
What happens when a key collaborator rewrites the history of their work together? Michael Bloomfield's electric guitar work on Highway 61 Revisited played a central role in shaping the album's raw electric sound. Dylan admired Bloomfield's skill and viewed their partnership as an essential part of his transition into a groundbreaking new era. Together they created music that many credit as the turning point for folk rock, with Dylan seeing their collaboration as an almost sacred meeting of artistic minds. But Bloomfield didn't hold the relationship in the same regard. After the album's success, he distanced himself, turning down offers to tour or record further. Worse still, in later interviews, he claimed he had saved Dylan's career by making him rock, even going so far as to call himself the real architect of folk rock. For Dylan, this wasn't just arrogance, it was betrayal. He felt Bloomfield had rewritten their history, erasing the collaborative spirit Dylan had cherished. This fallout went deeper than a creative dispute. Dylan cut ties completely, his silence becoming a sharp indicator of his hurt. Next, how did Dylan handle criticism from a Beatle? Number 7, Paul McCartney. Can a single comment derail a proposed tour with one of the most famous musicians on the planet? For Bob Dylan and Paul McCartney, everything changed in 1987. Despite their mutual admiration, the two had always maintained a certain distance. While Dylan appreciated McCartney's incredible skill for melody, he gravitated more toward John Lennon's rebellious energy, finding a closer artistic alignment there. Meanwhile, McCartney seemed to view Dylan as brilliant but overly complex, choosing accessibility over abstraction in his own music. Their differences had always existed under the surface, until McCartney made one remark too many. In an interview, McCartney casually commented that Dylan no longer wrote songs people could remember. It was an offhand critique, but to Dylan it cut deeply. He viewed McCartney's words as dismissive of the direction his later work had taken, more introspective, less radio-friendly. Rather than addressing it publicly, Dylan sent his message through actions. He abruptly withdrew from their rumored joint tour, leaving no room for reconciliation. Privately, he justified the decision with a single line: "Paul writes love letters, I write scars." The tension lingered, unresolved but unforgettable. At 83, Bob Dylan's decision to speak about these conflicts isn't about revenge, it's about truth. These 7 fractured relationships show us a deeper layer of who Dylan is. They aren't just grudges or betrayals, they're reflections of his journey through fame, creativity, and self-doubt. Each fallout, whether with a collaborator, a peer, or a former partner, tells a story of vulnerability behind the legend. It's a reminder that even icons have fragile moments. Dylan's music might be timeless, but the man behind it remains deeply human. Let us know in the comments which rivalry surprised you the most.